Across the galaxy, war raged between countless factions. The galaxy's different species were fighting for control of a star system rich with resources. But no one could see how far this conflict would go. The star system, once peaceful, now hung in the balance. The creatures of this galaxy had their own fears, hopes, and dreams, but war was a constant threat. One day, an unknown species in the galaxy, the Talon, found themselves in a life-threatening position. Their home planet was under attack. Talon were a peaceful race, known for their advanced technology and deep knowledge of the stars. But even with their abilities, they were no match for the ruthless invaders who had descended on their world. The Talon had no choice. They needed help. But they didn't know who to call. The galaxy was vast, and they were isolated. They had no allies, no one they could trust. Desperation began to settle in as the enemy forces closed in on their planet. Every moment was precious, and every decision weighed heavily on them. In their darkest hour, the Talon did something they had never done before. They sent out a distress signal, a call for help. It wasn't a normal call. It was a plea that went far beyond their home system. The signal stretched across the vast emptiness of space, hoping to catch the attention of any species willing to help. But there was one problem. The message was vague. The Talon did not know which species would receive it, didn't even know if anyone would respond. Minds? It could have been anyone. A distant ally, perhaps, or a powerful foe looking for an advantage. The Talon had no way of knowing who would hear the call. They simply had to hope. The message echoed through the cosmos, traveling to the farthest reaches of space. It wasn't a simple S, it was a cry for survival, one that the Talon sent. With a mix of fear and hope, their world was crumbling, and they were out of time. In the stars, on the edge of the galaxy, a distant race of warriors heard the signal. These beings were known as the Deathworlders. Their reputation was both feared and respected across the galaxy. The Deathworlders were not just warriors, they were survivors of the harshest, most dangerous worlds in the known universe. They were called Deathworlders because they had survived what would have been certain death for any other species. Deathworlders thrived where other races would perish. They lived on worlds filled with deadly creatures, violent storms, and extreme conditions. To them, danger was part of life. They were born to survive, to fight, and to overcome, and win. They heard the Talon's distress call. They knew they would answer. However, they did not rush in immediately. The Deathworlders were known for their patience and careful planning. They would not help unless they knew the situation was worth it. A small, isolated species like the Talon might not be worth their time, but the Deathworlders were calculating. They knew that sometimes helping the weak could provide them with valuable allies in the future. As the Talon continued to send their plea for help, the Deathworlders' leaders debated in their war rooms. They reviewed the information they had received, analyzing the message with cold precision. They weighed the risks of helping the Talon against the potential rewards. The Deathworlders did not believe in pity. They did not believe in aiding those who could not defend themselves. But they did believe in survival land. They respected those who fought to survive. The Talon were struggling, but their message showed something the Deathworlders respected: determination. They had not given up. The decision was made. The Deathworlders would respond, but they would not offer simple aid. It would come not as saviors, but as teachers. They would show the Talon how to survive the way they had learned to survive. And if the Talon wanted to live, they would have to prove themselves worthy of the Deathworlders' help. The ships of the Deathworlders, massive and imposing, began their journey across the galaxy. They were not small craft, easily overlooked. These were warships, built to endure and fight through the most hostile environments. Each ship was a symbol of the Deathworlders' strength, their resolve, and their unyielding nature. As their ships sliced through space, they left behind them a trail of destruction. Nothing could stand in their way. They moved with purpose. Their arrival inevitable? The Deathworlders were coming, and their reputation had already begun to precede them. Back on Talon's world, the Talon leadership watched nervously. They had no idea what to expect. They had sent their message with the hope that anyone would answer. But now that someone was coming, they weren't sure whether it would be salvation or disaster. The skies above their planet darkened as the Deathworlders' ships arrived. Sight of these towering, dark vessels made the Talon uneasy. The once peaceful world, now on the brink of collapse, was about to face a new kind of reality. The Talon had no idea who had arrived to answer their call. They didn't know that the beings who had come were not saviors or simple allies. They were Deathworlders, the toughest, most fearsome warriors in the galaxy. And they were here to teach the Talon what it meant to survive. The Talon waited in silence as the ships descended, unsure of what the future would hold. Would they find hope in the Deathworlders, or would they regret summoning them? This part sets the stage for the arrival of the Deathworlders, while focusing on the Talon's desperation and the mysterious nature of the Deathworlders. It's engaging and free of any violated content, following the tone you requested. Let me know if you need it. The Talon waited in tense silence. The massive ships of the Deathworlders hovered above their planet, casting long shadows over the surface. The once calm skies now seemed heavy, filled with the pressure of the unknown. For a moment, there was no sound. The usual hum of the planet's air seemed to have stopped. Everything was still. The Talon had expected some sort of grand entrance. After all, they had heard of the Deathworlders, their fearsome reputation, and their ability to survive in the harshest conditions. But nothing could have prepared them for the sight of these ships. They were like nothing the Talon had ever seen. Dark, jagged shapes, their surfaces covered with strange symbols and markings. The ships looked like they belonged to another world, one that was unfamiliar, frightening, powerful. In the control rooms of the Talon leadership, panic mixed. With curiosity, they had sent their signal, hoping for help. But now that help was here, they were unsure of how to proceed. The Deathworlders had not sent a message or offered any sign of their intentions. The ships simply arrived silent and imposing, like the calm before a storm. In the command center, General Varen, the Talon leader, stood with his most trusted officers. He was a strong man, tall and broad, but even he felt small under the weight of this moment. He had spent years leading his people with honor, but he had never faced anything like this. His mind raced with questions. Who were these Deathworlders? What did they want? Did they even help them? Or had they come to take control of Talon's world for themselves? Need to approach them, General Varen said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty in his heart. We have no choice now. Officers nodded, but their faces were filled with doubt. They had no idea what the Deathworlders expected. How could they? The Talon had only heard stories, whispers from other civilizations about these deadly warriors who lived on worlds filled with danger. Some said the Deathworlders never showed mercy. Others said they valued strength above all else. But none of it was certain, and no one had ever truly understood what made them tick. Minutes passed, and the first of the Deathworlders' ships finally descended, touching down on the Talon surface. The sound of the ship's massive engines reverberated across the planet. The Talon held their breath as the ramp to the ship slowly lowered, revealing what they had feared: tall, armored figures. Stepping down into the Talon world for the first time, the Deathworlders moved with purpose. Their every step measured and deliberate. They were not an army that marched with any form of fanfare. No loud cries or threats, just silence, and the heavy weight of their presence. Their leader, a towering figure in dark armor, led the group. His helmet was covered with strange markings. His eyes, if anyone could see them, were hidden behind a visor. General Varen and his officers stood, watching the Deathworlders approach. The alien warriors moved in perfect formation, walking with the kind of discipline that only came from years of experience on the deadliest worlds. Their equipment, from the guns slung at their sides to the packs on their backs, was unlike anything the Talon had ever seen. It was made for survival in environments where even the air could kill you. "Are you the ones who answered our call?" General Varen asked, his voice firm but his heart pounding. He didn't know what to expect. Would they speak in a language he could understand? Would they demand something from the Talon in return for their help? The Deathworlder leader turned to face him. The sound of his voice echoed, deep and resonant, like a rumble of thunder. "We heard your signal," he said, his voice carrying a weight that made the air feel thicker. "But we did not come to save you." The Talon held their breath. What did he mean? Had they misunderstood? The words struck them like a cold wave. The leader continued, his eyes never leaving General Varen. "We came because you called for help, but this is not charity. We will not save those who cannot save themselves." General Varen nodded slowly, trying to absorb the meaning behind the leader's words. "You will help us, but you expect something in return?" he asked carefully, still unsure what to make of the situation. The Deathworlder leader gave a short nod. "We will teach you how to survive," he said, his voice calm and unyielding. "But you must prove yourselves worthy. If you cannot adapt, if you cannot fight, we will leave. And this planet will fall to your enemies." The weight of his words hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. The Talon were not warriors. They had never needed to fight. They had lived in peace for centuries, using their advanced technology to maintain harmony with their environment. But now, they faced a reality where peace might no longer be an option. They needed to learn how to fight, how to survive. "We are ready," General Varen said, his voice gaining strength. "Teach us. We will not fail." The Deathworlder leader gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Then prepare yourselves. Training begins tomorrow." The Deathworlders turned and began to move back toward their ships, signaling the others to follow. General Varen and his officers watched as the warriors retreated to their massive vessels. They still had so many questions, but for now, they had only one. Would they be able to survive the teachings of the Deathworlders, or would they fall like so many others had before them? As the Deathworlders disappeared into their ships, the Talon felt a strange mixture of fear and hope. The help they had called for was nothing like they expected. It was help nonetheless. And now, they would have to learn to fight alongside these powerful, deadly beings, or face the end of everything they had ever known. This part delves deeper into the arrival of the Deathworlders, introducing their intimidating nature while showing the Talon's uncertainty and willingness to learn. It's designed to be engaging and suspenseful, ensuring that the story remains interesting for the reader. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting long shadows across the alien landscape. The Talon had never seen the sky so gray, the air so thick with anticipation. The Deathworlders were about to begin their training, and every Talon soldier knew this would be unlike anything they had ever experienced. The previous night had been filled with tension and questions. But now there was only one thought on everyone's mind: survival. General Varen stood at the edge of the training grounds, watching as the first group of Deathworlders began to set up their equipment. Their actions were calm and methodical. Each movement was precise, like a well-rehearsed dance. The Talon officers stood beside him, all of them filled with equal parts fear and respect. None of them had ever seen warriors like these before. The Deathworlders were not here to give orders. They were here to teach, to transform everyone who had the strength to learn. The training field was a vast open space, surrounded by rocky hills and barren soil. The Talon had no idea what kind of tests the Deathworlders would put them through, but they had a sense it wouldn't be easy. The Deathworlders' presence was a reminder of just how far out of their depth the Talon had fallen. As the last of the Deathworlders moved into position, General Varen stepped forward. His voice, although firm, carried a note of uncertainty. "We are ready. Show us what we must learn." The Deathworlder leader, whose name the Talon still didn't know, turned toward him. His dark helmet reflected the sunlight, hiding his expression. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, with a single, quick motion, he raised his hand, signaling the start of the training. "Your first lesson," the leader said, his voice low and commanding, "is survival. We'll see if you have what it takes to endure." Without another word, the Deathworlders broke into action. They moved like shadows, fast and silent, setting up strange devices across the field. Talon watched, confused. They had no idea what the machines were for, but the Deathworlders weren't waiting for them to ask questions. The leader's orders were clear. It would be tested. The first test began unexpectedly. The Deathworlders triggered the devices, and suddenly the ground beneath the Talon's feet trembled. From the rocky hills surrounding the field, creatures began to emerge, powerful beasts with long claws and glowing eyes. They had been hiding in the shadows, waiting for this moment. The Talon instinctively took a step back, their hearts racing. These creatures were unlike anything they had seen. The beasts were massive, their bodies covered in thick armor-like scales, and their movements were lightning fast. It was a test, but the Talon hadn't expected it to be this dangerous. General. Varen felt his pulse quicken. He had trained soldiers for years, but he had never faced anything like this. He'd seen battles, but this was something else entirely. The creatures were too fast, too strong, and they didn't care who the Talon were. They were only there to kill the Deathworlders, however, were calm. They stood in perfect formation, watching the creatures with cold eyes. Then, without a word, they moved in. The leader acted first, drawing a weapon from his side. It wasn't a gun or a sword, but something the Talon had never seen before. It was long, sleek, and made of materials that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. He swung it with incredible force, cutting through one of the creatures with ease. The Talon soldiers stood frozen for a moment, stunned by the Deathworlders' speed and skill. It was clear that these warriors didn't fear the beasts they commanded the fight. Move. The Deathworlder leader shouted. The Talon soldiers snapped. To attention, they had no choice but to follow. But what they didn't expect was the sheer level of danger. The creatures were vicious, their claws slashing through the air with deadly precision. The Talon tried to defend themselves, but they were not ready. Their weapons were designed for long-range combat, not close-quarter survival.
They were at
a disadvantage. General Varen charged forward, leading his soldiers with everything he had. He swung his blade at one of the creatures, missing by inches as it dodged with terrifying speed. But he didn't stop. He couldn't afford to. Behind him, the rest of the Talon forces fought to hold their ground. The Deathworlders didn't just watch, they intervened. They moved with such fluidity and skill that it seemed like they were everywhere at once. A strange weapon again, cutting down another creature with a single blow. Another threw a small device onto the ground, and in an instant the ground shook again, sending a wave of energy through the field. The remaining creatures faltered, momentarily stunned by the blast. The Talon, now motivated by the presence of the Deathworlders, began to rally. They fought with renewed determination, their fear slowly turning into focus. It wasn't easy, but they were learning. Slowly, they adapted to the pace of the battle. They learned to move faster, to react quicker, to fight without hesitation. After what felt like hours, the last of the creatures was finally defeated. The field was littered with their massive, lifeless bodies. The Talon soldiers, panting and exhausted, stood side by side with the Deathworlders. They had made it through their first test, but they knew this was only the beginning. The Deathworlder leader approached. General Varen, his helmet tilted slightly as he examined the Talon soldiers. "You have passed your first test," he said, his voice flat but not unkind. "But remember, this survival is not given. It is earned." General Varen nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. He felt both relief and a new sense of respect for these deadly warriors. The battle had been intense, but it had taught them something they couldn't learn from books or technology. It had taught them to fight. "As long as we have breath, we will learn," General Varen said. The Deathworlder leader nodded once more. "Good. You will need every lesson, and you will need to be ready. Your enemies will not wait." The Deathworlders turned and began to move back to their ships. The Talon soldiers stood in silence, watching them leave. The first lesson was over, but the hardest lessons were still to come. This part showcases the first encounter between the Talon and the Deathworlders. Highlighting the brutal training and the Talon's struggle to adapt, it's engaging, filled with action, and sets the stage for the lessons the Talon will have to learn. The days following the first battle were filled with tension. The Talon had survived their first test, but that was only the beginning. The Deathworlders had made it clear, survival was not guaranteed. They would need to be trained, not just in combat, but in everything that made the Deathworlders the most feared warriors in the galaxy. The next morning, the Talon were once again gathered in the training grounds. The Deathworlders stood in formation, their cold eyes watching them with careful precision. General Varen and his officers stood at the front of the group, their faces still marked with exhaustion from the previous day's battle. "This is not the end," the Deathworlder leader said. "Yesterday, you fought. Today, you will learn. The fight is always inside your mind. We will push you until your body breaks. If you do not break, you will survive." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that the Talon couldn't ignore. They had faced death, but now they would face something worse, training that would test their limits. The Deathworlders began the day's lesson with a series of physical drills. The Talon had been used to their comfortable lives on their peaceful planet, where technology solved most problems. But now, they had to face the harsh reality of physical survival. They were made to run, to climb, to push their bodies past what they thought was possible. At first, the Talon struggled. Many of them stumbled, their limbs not used to the grueling exercise. Their bodies were not built for the harsh conditions of the Deathworlders' training. But the Deathworlders did not show mercy. They watched silently as the Talon pushed forward, forcing them to endure more than they ever thought they could. General Varen was among the first to fall behind. His legs burned with pain, his breath coming in short gasps. He was no stranger to physical strain, but this was different. The heat of the sun, the weight of his armor, the constant pressure at all seemed to work against him, yet he refused to stop. He gritted his teeth and kept moving, even when it seemed like his body might collapse. Behind him, the Talon soldiers followed his example. They were all struggling, each in their own way. Some fell to their knees, their bodies giving out from exhaustion. Others fought through the pain, pushing forward even though every muscle screamed for relief. The Deathworlders did not offer encouragement or sympathy. They simply observed, their eyes cold and unmoving. They were testing the Talon's resolve. The message was clear. The Talon had to prove they could survive. The Deathworlders would not waste their time on those who could not keep up. By the time the sun began to set, the Talon had been pushed to their limits. The training had been brutal, but there was a shift in the air. They were no longer the same. A group of soldiers who had first faced the Deathworlders, they had been broken down and rebuilt piece by piece. The Talon were learning to endure. General Varen stood at the front of the group, sweat dripping down his face. He felt every muscle in his body ache, but he stood tall. He had made it through the day's training, and so had the others. Had been tested, and they had survived. The Deathworlder leader walked toward them, his expression unreadable. He said nothing at first, only observing the Talon with his cold gaze. Then, after a long silence, he spoke. "Today, you have learned what it means to survive. But this is just the beginning. Survival is not about strength alone. It is about will. It is about being able to endure, even when everything else fails. You will continue to be tested." The Talon soldiers exchanged glances. They were tired, but there was a new sense of determination in their eyes. The Deathworlders had shown them a new way of life, one that demanded more than just skill. It demanded resilience, the ability to adapt and push through even the hardest of times. The next few days passed in a blur of constant training. The Deathworlders pushed them harder each time, practiced combat, learned to fight without weapons, and endured hours of physical endurance exercises. The Talon had to adapt quickly, learning from their mistakes and becoming stronger with each lesson. But it wasn't just physical strength they had to develop. The Deathworlders also taught them how to survive mentally. They would face challenges that would test their resolve, facing simulated dangers, making decisions under pressure, and learning how to work as a team. The Deathworlders believed that a strong mind was just as important as a strong body. As the days turned into weeks, the Talon began to change. The once weak soldiers grew stronger, more capable. They became more aware of their surroundings, learning to read the signs of danger before it arrived. They learned how to fight with precision, how to anticipate an enemy's moves, and how to remain calm even in the face of the most terrifying threats. General Varin, once unsure and hesitant, found himself changing as well. He had always been a leader, but now he understood what it truly meant to lead. It wasn't just about giving orders or making decisions, it was about inspiring others to push forward. Even when the odds seemed impossible, on the final day of their training, the Deathworlders gathered the Talon soldiers together one last time. The Deathworlder leader stood before them, his helmet still hiding his expression. "You have passed your first tests," he said. "You are no longer the same as you were when we first arrived. You have proven your strength, your resilience, and your will to survive. You are ready." The Talon soldiers stood taller now, their bodies scarred but stronger than before. They had learned what it meant to survive, to endure, to fight. But the Deathworlder leader's words were not a final victory. They were a challenge. "This is only the beginning," he said. "You are ready for the real test now. The war is not over. The enemy still stands, and you will face them together." The Talon had trained for this moment, but now they had to prove it on the battlefield. With the Deathworlders by their side, they were no longer the weak, helpless species they had once been. They were warriors. This part focuses on the intense training the Talon undergo to survive and adapt to the harsh lessons taught by the Deathworlders. It's designed to be engaging, showing the characters' growth while setting the stage for their future battles. The time for training was over. The Deathworlders had put the Talon through their paces, teaching them everything they needed to know about survival. General Varin and his soldiers had grown stronger, more capable, but now they faced a new challenge. The enemy was coming. They would have to fight with everything they had learned. The morning of the final battle dawned dark and quiet. The Talon had gathered in their makeshift camp near the front lines. They stood in formation, their eyes set on the horizon. Behind them, the Deathworlders were preparing, just as silent, just as focused. The Talon soldiers had come a long way since their first encounter with these fierce warriors, and now they would fight together. General Varin walked along the line of soldiers, his eyes scanning the faces of his comrades. He could see the tension in their eyes, but he also saw something else: his determination. They were no longer the same weak soldiers who had called for help. They'd become something stronger, something better. The Deathworlders had shown them what true strength looked like, and now they were ready to face the coming storm. The Deathworlder leader approached Varin, his voice low but steady. "Today, you will fight for your survival. You have learned what you need to know. Now, you must show it." Varin nodded, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon. "We are ready." The Deathworlder leader gave a sharp nod. "Then let us begin." With that, the Deathworlders and the Talon soldiers moved out, heading toward the enemy's position. The air was thick with tension as the two sides drew closer. The Talon had no idea what the enemy would bring, but they knew one thing: they had to fight to the end. As they marched, General Varin kept his eyes on the Deathworlders. They were not rushing forward like the Talon had done in the past. The Deathworlders moved slowly, methodically, as if they were anticipating every possible outcome. It was clear they were in control, the Talon soldiers, following their example, moved with the same careful precision, each step bringing them closer to their enemy. Suddenly, the ground began to rumble. In the distance, the Talon could see the movement of the enemy's army. They were massive, towering figures covered in armor. Their weapons were unlike anything the Talon had ever seen, and their ships hovered above the battlefield, ready to unleash their firepower. General Varin's heart raced. This was it. There was no turning back now. The Deathworlders didn't hesitate. The leader raised his hand, signaling the start of the battle. The Talon soldiers, now prepared for what was to come, followed without question. They spread out across the battlefield, taking positions as the first shots rang out. The clash of weapons echoed across the field as the two sides collided. The Talon fought with everything they had, their movements more precise than ever before. They remembered the training they had endured, the lessons they had learned from the Deathworlders. They fought with a new purpose, using their knowledge of the terrain and their newfound strength to outmaneuver the enemy. The Deathworlders fought alongside them, each one a force of nature. Their weapons moved in quick, fluid motions, cutting down the enemy with ease. The Talon had never seen anything like it. These warriors were ruthless, efficient, and completely unyielding. It was as if they were one with the battlefield, every move calculated and deadly. General Varen found himself in the thick of the battle. His sword raised high as he cut through the enemy ranks. His body was tired, but his mind was sharp, moved with a new confidence, no longer the unsure leader he had once been. He was a warrior now, just like the Deathworlders. Beside him, his soldiers fought with the same intensity. They had come so far from where they had started. They were no longer afraid of the enemy. They were no longer afraid of death. They fought for each other, for their planet, and for their survival. The enemy was relentless, but the Talon had learned. To fight like the Deathworlders didn't rely on technology alone. They relied on their strength, their instincts, and their training. They moved together as a unit, supporting one another as they pushed forward, as the battle raged on. General Varen caught a glimpse of the Deathworlder leader. He was standing on a ridge, watching the battle unfold with cold eyes. The Deathworlder leader was calm, unbothered by the chaos around him. He had no doubt that they would win, but he also knew that the Talon had to prove themselves. The fight continued, with both sides taking heavy losses. The Talon were growing stronger, but the enemy was relentless, seemed to be everywhere, attacking from all directions. The Talon soldiers were outnumbered, but they fought with the fierce determination that the Deathworlders had instilled in them. Every time one of them fell, another stepped forward to take their place. As the sun began to set, the tide of the battle began to shift. The Talon were not only surviving, they were winning. The enemy, overwhelmed by the sheer force of the Talon's determination, began to falter. Their ranks started to break apart as the Talon pushed forward, forcing them back. General Varen could feel the change in the air. The battle was turning in their favor. They had learned to survive. They had learned to fight. And now they were proving it. With one final push, the Talon and the Deathworlders surged forward, driving the enemy from the battlefield. The enemy forces, now broken and defeated, retreated. Leaving the Talon victorious, the Talon stood tall, exhausted, but triumphant. The Deathworlders had shown them what true strength meant, but it was the Talon who had won the battle. They had proven themselves worthy of the lessons they had learned. General Varen looked out over the battlefield, his chest rising and falling with each breath. They had done it. The Talon had fought and won side by side with the Deathworlders. The enemy had been defeated, but the real victory was in the transformation that had taken place. The Talon were no longer just survivors. They were warriors. And as the sun set on the battlefield, General Varen knew that this was only the beginning. The galaxy had seen the strength of the Talon, and there was no going back. They had earned their place among the stars. This part captures the intensity of the final battle, showing how the Talon have grown through their training with the Deathworlders. It's filled with action and highlights their transformation from weak survivors to strong warriors. The battlefield was quiet now. The last echoes of battle faded into the distance, replaced by the soft wind that swept across the scorched earth. The Talon soldiers stood together, their bodies tired and bruised, but their faces were filled with pride. They had fortand one. It was a victory that had seemed impossible just weeks ago, but now it felt real. General Varen stood at the front of his soldiers, his gaze sweeping over the fallen enemy. The Talon had not only survived, they had triumphed, had proven their worth, not just to the Deathworlders, but to themselves. For the first time, General Varen felt the weight of leadership lift from his shoulders. They had done it. Had earned their place in this new world. Beside him, the Deathworlder leader watched silently. His helmet was still in place, but Varen could feel the weight of his gaze. The Deathworlder leader had been with them through every step of this journey, teaching them, pushing them, showing them what it meant to survive. And now, they had succeeded. But this was not the end. The Deathworlder leader stepped forward, his voice low but steady. "You have done well, General Varen. Your people fought with strength, with courage. You have proven yourselves worthy of survival." Varen nodded, his voice filled with gratitude. "We couldn't have done it without your guidance. Us what it means to fight, to survive. We owe you everything." The Deathworlder leader didn't respond with words. He simply gave a small nod, acknowledging the thanks. It wasn't necessary. Deathworlders did not fight for praise. They fought because it was their way, and in their eyes survival was its own reward. Why, as the Talon began to regroup and tend to the wounded, the Deathworlder leader turned toward the horizon. The battle was over, but the war for the galaxy was not. There was much to be done. The Talon had proven themselves in battle, but the galaxy was vast and filled with new threats. There were new challenges on the horizon, and they would need to face them together. "We are not finished," the Deathworlder leader said, his voice cutting through the silence. "This victory is only the beginning. The galaxy is filled with dangers you have yet to face, and we will face them together." General Varen's heart swelled with pride. He had known from the start that the Deathworlders were not here just to help them win a single battle. They were here to forge an alliance, one that would change the course of the galaxy. The Talon and the Deathworlders were now bound together, their fates linked by the bond forged in blood and sweat. "We are ready," General Varen said. "Whatever comes next, we will face it as one." The Deathworlder leader gave him a sharp look, as if assessing his sincerity. Then, after a long moment, he nodded. "Good, you are ready. And now, the galaxy will know the strength of the Talon. Together, we will show them what it means to stand against us." With that, the Deathworlders began to move toward their ships, their large, imposing figures retreating into the distance. But General Varen knew this wasn't goodbye. It was the beginning of something new. The Deathworlders had come to teach the Talon how to survive. But now, they were allies. And together they would stand against the darkness that threatened the galaxy. Over the next few weeks, the Talon and the Deathworlders worked together to rebuild. The Deathworlders helped the Talon learn more about the galaxy, teaching them about the various species, their strengths, their weaknesses. They trained the Talon to fight alongside them, to become part of the larger galactic community. And in return, the Talon shared their knowledge of technology, of science, and of the ways of peace. At first, the other species in the galaxy were wary of this new alliance. The Talon were not known for their strength, and the Deathworlders were feared by many. But as the two races worked together, proving their capabilities, the other species began to take notice. The Talon were no longer the weak, helpless species they had once been. They had become powerful warriors, standing side by side with the galaxy's most feared beings. One by one, other civilizations began to join the alliance. The Talon now, strong and capable, had earned their place among the stars. The Deathworlders had shown them how to survive, how to fight, and how to stand tall. But it was the Talon who had shown the galaxy that even the weakest could rise to become strong. Even the most peaceful could become warriors when the need arose. As time went on, the alliance grew stronger. The Talon and the Deathworlders worked together to secure peace in the galaxy, fighting off new threats, and ensuring that the lessons learned in battle were never forgotten. The Talon soldiers, once unsure of their place in the universe, had now become a force to be reckoned with. They had earned the respect of those who had once doubted them. General Varen stood on the balcony of his command center looking out. Over the city that had once been a symbol of weakness, now it stood as a beacon of strength and unity. The Talon had come a long way, but they had only just begun. The Deathworlders were no longer just their teachers, they were their partners, their allies. Together, they would shape the future of the galaxy. And as General Varen watched the ships of the Deathworlders disappear into the stars, he knew one thing for certain. The galaxy had never seen anything like the alliance between the Talon and the Deathworlders. They had proven that survival wasn't just about strength, it was about unity. And together, they would face whatever challenges the future held. This part marks the transition from conflict to cooperation, with the Talon and the Deathworlders forming a lasting alliance. The Talon have transformed from a weak species into powerful allies, ready to face the future together. The chapter highlights themes of growth, strength, and unity. Let me know if you need any